And I'm Monty Belmonte. Today is a lot about reframing perspective, so we'll have a talk about why the dictionary's language is the way it is, and the whole new category of words that we have on our very own Springfield-based dictionary to thank for with Merriam-Webster Editor-at-Large, Peter Sokolowski. Is your microphone even on?
I don't even know!
Here, use my microphone. It sounds good.
Live radio, everybody!
I'll keep going. And we'll hear about two BIPOC-centered farming communities collaborating to bring folks in contact with the land and the work of Audre Lorde as we speak with David Ragland of Kibilio Farm in Leyden and Amber Arnorld of Susu Community and Farm in Newfame, Vermont. How's that one working?
That one works. That's fine.
Like
okay, I'm here now. Plus, tomorrow night in Great Barrington, an important modern take on one of the world's first pieces of horror short fiction takes the stage. Opening on Thursday, August 20th, to close out its 2026 season, the Great Barrington Public Theater will premiere the play Yellow Wallpaper 2020. This work takes us down the rabbit hole of Charlotte Perkins Gilman's profound short story, The Yellow Wallpaper, written in 1892, but reimagined here in the early days of the pandemic. With humor, social critique, and the quivering bones of a horror story, Jennifer Maisel's wonderful play will bring you face to face with the heroine's deep 2020 dilemmas, passions, and choices. With us to talk about this production are the director of the show, Judy Braha, and playwright Jennifer Maisel. Judy Braha has been a director, actor, teacher, and artist for social justice for over 4 decades, longtime head of the MFA directing program at Boston University School of Theater. Her credits include theaters, prisons, universities throughout New England and beyond. Recently named artistic director of Great Barrington Public Theater in the beautiful Berkshires, she is dedicated to the development and production of new work. Jennifer Maisel is a graduate of Cornell University and received her MFA in dramatic writing from NYU's Tisch School of the Arts. She is a member of the Dramatists Guild, the WGA, the Playwrights Union, the Dog Ear Playwrights Collective. She's the author of 16 plays, including Yellow Wallpaper 2.0, and a number of TV pilots and scripts as well. Maisel has won the Stanley Award and the Woodward Newman Award for Drama, Showtime's Tony Cox Screenwriting Award, and has earned a bevy of accolades, including in Backstage Magazine and Dramatist Magazine, amongst others. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Our pleasure.
Jennifer, I'm curious what appealed to you about The Yellow Wallpaper as a short story. I'm familiar with it because I listen to a lot of horror fiction podcasts, and I remember a really moving reading of it on Pseudopod. And what appealed to you about this particular story?
I think I first got turned on when I was in college and her book, Herland. And then I found The Yellow Wallpaper and I read it, and it just spirals in such a perfect way that you walk into her insanity the same way that she writes it, but you never know how you got there. It was just in my head. I'd revisit it a lot. And then the pandemic hit, and I just kept thinking it's like quarantine is just like being, put on a cure for bed rest and for hysteria, but you're going to go crazy. Particularly me. I thought I would go crazy. I was invited to go to Dow House, which was Eugene O'Neill's West Coast estate. And what they do is they bring in like one writer at a time, and you're at the top of this mountain in his estate, and you get to write in the trunk room, which was his wife Carlotta's suitcase room. And it was right when I just had gotten my second vaccine. So like when I just became like 2021. And I went from like isolation to more isolation. And there are certain things in this play that come from just being there, like reading O'Neill's love letters to Carlotta. There are just certain things that the place imbued that I took and put into the play.
Playwright of The Yellow Wallpaper 2.0 2020. We're also with co-artistic director of the Great Barrington Public Theater, Judy Braha. I'm curious, this whole season has been premieres. Is that normal for a season at Great Barrington Public Theater, or is this unique for this year?
No, we only do new work, and we're very dedicated to the development and production of new work. Sometimes the new works have had other lives, but it so happens that this year, all 3 shows we've been doing this summer are world premieres. They've had readings, but they haven't had a production.
That's wicked cool.
Super exciting to discover how a play lives on its feet when it's only had a life on a piece of paper.
We're talking with the director and playwright of Yellow Wallpaper 2.0 2020, which will be opening at the Great Barrington Public Theater on August 20th. This is a really small play. Like I was reading, I think it's 1 or 2 cast members, or it's a very small cast. In the original story, I think there's only really like 5-ish characters, including the baby that they eventually mention. But talk about the intimacy and the importance of keeping this cast very small.
These days, 2-character plays are big because theaters don't have the money to do anything more. But in writing it, and I was writing it during the pandemic, I was really trying to write something that was flexible enough that we could do it on Zoom, or a play in which 2 characters don't need to touch or be in the same place. But also in the head of the story, it's her. And it's sometimes John at the door, and you hear Jenny, but Jenny doesn't speak. So to me, this was the right number of people for this play. And I even think in a crazy production, you could have her voice John, just be a total solo piece.
From my side, we are in an interim space this summer at St. James Place in Great Barrington. And our usual home was the Daniel Art Center at Simon's Rock, which is now for sale.
Right.
So in this interim space, we've created a very intimate seating arrangement. And we were looking for plays that fit and really could live fully in this very intimate space. So this certainly fell into that category.
A lot of the theater pieces that we've talked about on this show have had talkbacks at certain points in their run. You have a lot of talkbacks for this particular show, and they are all in conjunction with an array of therapists.
Yes.
In no small part because there's a lot that comes up in this show, not just her alleged hysteria, but like there's gaslighting, there are parts postpartum depression, there's a number of issues that arise in the original story as well. But talk about bringing in that array of therapists for the talkbacks of Yellow Wallpaper 2.0 2020.
Yeah, I think the play being reset in the early days of COVID brings another layer to it. What happened to mothers during the pandemic, and how it really sort of, in a way, even drove a wedge between the genders. Because women were, for the most part, responsibility for childcare and continuing to work full time and run the household. And this play not only deals with the issues of the Yellow Wallpaper, the mistreatment of postpartum depression and labeling it as hysteria, but it also deals with what happened to people during COVID, and especially early in the shutdown, when people didn't know, people were washing their groceries. So I think it's important to be able to unpack that a little bit afterwards, because although we are treating COVID as history, it's something most of us have experience with and have been driven crazy by. So we've reached out and discovered a bunch of therapists who particularly treat either women or deal with motherhood and postpartum depression issues, postpartum psychosis, and really wanted to let the audience into that part of things.
Likewise, Jennifer Maisel, this is one of your most recent works in your very large catalog. Have you worked in horror before?
This was new for me in a couple ways. One of the few times I went to a source material but messed with it. And I didn't really think of it as a horror story when I started out. I really thought about her experience of being sidelined and diminished because they wouldn't let her do anything she needed to do for her own sanity. I haven't done other horror except for a co-adaptation of The Dybbuk, which was a long time ago. I didn't really think about like I'm taking on a horror story. I thought about it as taking on a woman's like psychotic journey and, you know, those feelings when you've just had a child and you're totally hormonal, no one understands, and you go off balance.
Can I mention that we've been very interested in following the Lindsay Clancy trial?
Oh, yeah.
Because this is about postpartum psychosis, which our character doesn't have, but the way they're questioning therapists and questioning Lindsay Clancy's motives and all of that has been very interesting as we work on this play.
Yes, yes. It's most beautiful when it's accidentally timely. I
Yes,
think.
for sure. Who knew?
And nothing in theater can be timely because, you know, I wrote this in 2021. And this is how long it takes to get a play up. And this is pretty short, truthfully.
Yeah.
So, especially because there was not a lot of theater happening in the pandemic and for a while afterwards.
I'm just thinking you can look around and see how many productions of Hamlet are going on right now.
Mm-hmm.
Productions of The Tempest. The world just sort of reconjures these plays periodically.
Yeah, there's interesting, like, it's always interesting, I feel, to watch where the current Shakespeare zeitgeist is. A year or two ago, it was Twelfth Night, in conjunction with a lot of the trans legislation, I think.
Yeah, the Scottish play as well has been produced.
Yep.
And actually, my newest hot off the press play is a riff on Macbeth called Beth, the Girl Who Would Be King.
Ooh, that sounds awesome.
So it's a kind of riff on Macbeth in high school.
We're talking about the Yellow Wallpaper 2.0 2020, which is being produced by the Great Barrington Public Theater starting on August 20th. And I think my last question for you is that, to me, horror and this story in particular have always had a sort of social justice aspect to them. One of the key elements about this short story is she's being gaslit by her family, telling her, oh, she needs air, oh, she needs to eat, oh, she's fine, oh, she's more fine than she is. And no one really seeing what she's seeing or what she's going through. Can you talk about its connections to that sort of justice for people who really do need for their experiences to be more seen?
I mean, there is a long tradition of women being gaslit about their health that continues to this day.
Yep.
Do I need to say more? and even just this week, my sister, who is a doctor, sent me an article from a medical journal that was about how women got the rest cure and men with the same complaints were told to go west, young man, have an adventure. So women were locked in a room and men got to go play. Same symptoms.
I'm just thinking about the way that both the Yellow Wallpaper and Yellow Wallpaper 2.0 2020 are written. The central character is speaking from within their illness and pointing out the fact that the patriarchy, or I could say the patriarchal medical establishment, is misdiagnosing them and not understanding them, and they have to sort of decide how to cure themselves in a certain way. Which I love about both those stories and those stories woven together. So in 1892 and 2020, same mechanism is at work.
Sad that the things have not necessarily changed. The technology just has.
Yeah. But now we can scroll.
But that's why it's important to continue bringing up stories of this nature and presenting them as publicly as possible. And you'll have a chance to see the Yellow Wallpaper 2.0 2020 starting this week on Thursday the 20th and going through September 6th. You can find tickets and information through the Great Barrington Public Theater's website, and I have been joined by Judy Braha, director of the show and artistic director at Great Barrington Public Theater, and the playwright for the show, Jennifer Maisel. Thank you so much for joining me and chatting about this really interesting piece.
Thank you for having us.
Also, the original short story by Charlotte Perkins Gilman is in the public domain, so you can read it online or hear it through a number of podcasts that have done very good readings of it.
Coming up, Susu and Kibilio Communities and Farms team up for an event centering the work of Audre Lorde on Saturday, August 22nd.
But next, nouns as adjectives and adjectives as nouns, and why the dictionary sounds the way it does now with Jazz Alamode host and Merriam-Webster editor-at-large Peter Sokolowski.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM.
The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by the UMass 5 College Credit Union, dedicated to creating access to financial well-being for local people, businesses, and communities. Insured by NCUA, umass5.coop. The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by Northeast Solar in Hatfield, specializing in solar installations, battery storage, and clean energy solutions tailored to the homes and businesses of Western Massachusetts. Northeast-solar.com.
It's time once again for another Word Nerd segment with our interim summertime Word Nerd from Merriam-Webster's Dictionary in Springfield and also from Jazz Alamode here at NEPM.
Jazz at 8.
Peter Sokolowski. We're going to talk about nouns as adjectives, adjectives as nouns, and
Cats
all
and dogs living together.
Mass hysteria!
Grammar in the dictionary and the ruination of Merriam-Webster's dictionary and the poetry that used to exist there that no longer does.
It would be better to frame this as the people who didn't want change and how they were wrong in the face of progress.
And we'll throw a little inflation in to keep it topical.
I do sometimes think that dictionaries record change. That's what they do. And it's a problem because dictionaries also represent permanence. And this is what I call the dictionary paradox. Because if a dictionary doesn't give you the comfort that what you learned in school was correct and the way that you spell this word is the correct way and the sort of permanence that we get from knowledge that we grow up with, if it doesn't provide that, then it's not doing its job. But if the dictionary doesn't have the current words or the current usage in the dictionary, then it's also not doing its job. So it's a paradox. We need that illusion of permanence, but we also need to be revised and up to date. Monitoring language change is kind of, I think, a great way to think about what it is we do. The job is noticing and then acting on what you notice. And I think we all notice language change at different times.
One of my favorite moments, and Merriam-Webster's social media persons over the years have all been excellent. There was a time where Merriam-Webster entered in a bunch of different sexualities, transsexual, pansexual, all these words, and Troll said, well, if you're going to put in these words, you better be ready to put in a bunch of other words that have to do with sexuality. And the dictionary's response was, we were born ready. That's literally their job.
And that's the thing, is that it's also, people mistake it for advocacy when we are recording a fact. An easy example is designated hitter. I mean, there was no such thing as a designated hitter until Major League Baseball said there was. And now it had to go into the dictionary. So, I mean, that's not political. It's just a fact. It's just, it's what it is. Some things become controversial when mRNA vaccines became available. That was a different technology. It was a different science and therefore required a different definition. And some people felt that that was a political move, but it wasn't. It was reflecting the science, which reflected in the language.
Yeah.
And so our job is to be attentive to the language. It is, in that sense, completely non-political. It's that language that everybody uses. And it's funny that I remember when marriage, the definition of marriage included gay marriage, there were people who complained, but the people who might have been politically opposed to gay marriage still called it gay marriage. You need the word in the dictionary, whether you're for it or against it, because you're using that language to make the argument. So the point is, the dictionary doesn't take sides. The dictionary tells the truth about words. And that little phraseology, to tell the truth about words, is a quote. It's a quote from the editor-in-chief, I think maybe the most significant lexicographer in English of the 20th century. His name was Philip Babcock Gove. He worked right here in Springfield in the building that we still work in today. And he was the editor-in-chief of the big unabridged project, the big project after World War II, to change the language into a new dictionary for a new era, for the nuclear era, for the Cold War, for the plastic and chemical revolution that was going on. A big job. And what he did, I think, that we're going to focus on today is just a tiny little corner of his achievement, which is to bring grammar into dictionary defining. And what I mean by that is that, first of all, he wanted to make the dictionary shorter.
Ironic.
Yeah,
He's
yeah,
working
yeah.
on the unabridged
Yeah, you
version.
can make it as long as you want.
But because you wanted to squeeze as many different words in, which means you have to use fewer words to define them. One of the things he did was very simple, was not grammatical. He just said, okay, new rule, no proper nouns. He dropped all the proper nouns from because the previous edition had an entry for the Eiffel Tower and for the Great Pyramid of Giza. And he basically said, there's nothing we can tell you in a dictionary that an encyclopedia can't.
Yeah.
And in fact, an encyclopedia will do better because they have more space. So he just said, that's the new rule. We'll remove all these. And in point of fact, that was controversial at the time because it takes a little bit of the fun, or the unabridged dictionary was kind of the home internet of the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s. It was the reference book, like a gazetteer, like an atlas. You would get the birth dates of George Washington, and he basically said, we need to specialize. We need to be just about the meanings of words. And that was an important step. But the other thing he did to shorten the definitions was to make the definitions a single phrase, and that single phrase would be exactly the same grammatical function in any sentence. So that, for example, a noun would always be a noun phrase. If you look at a verb definition in Merriam-Webster's dictionaries, they always begin with the particle to. So, to run would be something like to move is the first. And so that you can always substitute the definition back into the sentence. That's the gold standard, if the definition can substitute for the head word. The problem was their earlier style of defining was more like writing essays, and so you had a definition that would be 4 or 5 sentences long that would really be describing the thing that the noun named rather than an equivalent of its meaning.
Right.
And this becomes a philosophical question. What is our job here? Are we trying to define the words, or are we trying to explain the phenomena that are labeled by those words? And an easy example is the word inflation, for example. So the definition in the 1934, the previous edition, which is a big, famous, fat, lovely dictionary, but had its idiosyncrasies too, it was like a little essay. And I'll just read it for you. The word inflation, disproportionate and relatively sharp and sudden increase in the quantity of money or credit or both relative to the amount of exchange business. Such increase may come as a result of unexpected additions to the supply of precious metals, as in the period following the Spanish conquests in Central and South America, or the period following the opening up of large new gold deposits, or it may come in times of business activity by expansion of credit through the banks, or it may come in times of financial difficulty by governmental issues of paper money without adequate metallic reserve and without provisions for conversion into standard metallic money on demand. In accordance with the law of quantity theory of money, inflation always produces a rise in the price level. So that is
It didn't mention Joe Biden once.
Yeah, but that is a description of the phenomenon of inflation, not an equivalent of the word.
Right.
You see,
It'd be
there's a
hard to
slight-
replace the word inflation with that whole paragraph.
Exactly.
Yes.
So that this man, Philip Gove, he radically reduced this to a single statement, a very short statement. An increase in the volume of money and credit relative to available goods, resulting in a substantial and continuing rise in the general price level.
Period.
That's it.
Yep.
And so that you can actually substitute that. It might be inelegant, but it will scan as a sentence. An easier example is just to take a word like Arctic. In fact, in the 1934 edition, there was no figurative definition for Arctic. It was just the location. Whereas we can say there was an Arctic wind, for example. You can use it just to mean very cold. And so that's since 2A is bitter cold. That's the definition, bitter cold. So you could say it was an Arctic winter. It was a bitter cold winter. It still works. So that substitutability brings grammatical congruity to the definitions. And that is one way in which he applied kind of new ideas to making the dictionary more technical, a little less readable maybe, but more exact and much more accurate. So another way that he did this in terms of grammar was to attack the way that we defined nouns. The problem with the English language is that all nouns can modify other nouns. So you can say wine glass, office building, coffee table, singles bar, apartment building, research paper. I mean, and those are one noun after another. And the fact is those had frequently been defined as adjectives when they modify other nouns. But Gove's idea was basically that there was no semantic difference in the word wine when you say wine glass, as opposed to would you like a glass of wine, in which case it's clearly a noun. And so he basically said, let's invent a new grammatical category, and we will call it the attributive noun. And in the dictionary, it's often labeled as attrib or usu attrib, usually attributive. But that just means a noun giving its attributes to another noun. It's a very elegant solution because there was no grammatical reason to separate these things. However, they're clearly used in slightly different syntactical ways. But again, that doesn't affect its semantic weight. A wine glass is a glass for wine. We don't need a new definition to take up, most importantly, extra lines in the dictionary. So he basically made a very simple move, but there's another piece of this. An attributive noun is not just a noun used as an adjective, because adjectives and nouns do function differently. First of all, an attributive noun can only come before a noun. You can have a business meeting. We can't say a meeting that is business. That wouldn't scan into an English speaker.
A meeting business is something else where
That's a different thing.
You make meetings, clearly, and this is your business.
Yeah, right. So you can see that English speakers, we automatically reorient the sense of the sentence according to the syntax of the words. So order matters in this case. But there's something else that you might not think of, which is that adjectives have comparative forms. One building can be taller than another, but it can't be more apartment than another.
I'm determined to try and use this.
We'll talk to wayfinders right down the street in the other part of Springfield. They
want
to make all buildings more apartment than they were before.
But,
it sounds like AI when you do it.
Yes, right.
Yes, but one glass can't be more wine than another.
Mine can.
And so, in other words, there is a very solid reason to keep these categories separate, that these are still nouns, they're attributive nouns in this case, they're not adjectives, because they don't function as adjectives. I think that's an important point. So that's all embedded in the dictionary, and it leads us to this kind of end of this conversation, which is what happens when you flip it and the adjectives work like nouns. Because what happens when you say the benign or the unknown or the imaginary? Those are poetic uses of adjectives and English is so rich in this sort of flexibility that we can do that. We can take this adjective and say the pretty or the beautiful, or the good, the bad, and the ugly. And that's the thing, is it is a poetic form. Blessed are the meek. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses. America the beautiful. It automatically elevates the adjective and it makes it special. It's still an adjective, but it's used in this case as a noun. And sometimes we might not even notice the young and the old. Those are very common uses. So you don't have to have a poetic intention to use this kind of flexible, different form of an adjective, turning it into a noun. What's important is that the dictionary has to account for all of these uses. And putting the words in order does involve grammar. And that's a funny thing, because dictionaries, really our job is to isolate a word, which means there's no grammar at all involved. We're just identifying the word. But identifying it correctly means also showing how it might connect to other words, which does lead us to grammar. And what I think is interesting about Gove's innovation, that edition, Webster's Third, 1961, was the first to very rigorously make every definition conform to the grammatical part of speech of its head word. That kind of rigor brought a kind of scientism, a kind of linguistic academic approach to dictionaries really for the first time. It was very criticized at the time because it was viewed as being too sciencey, too technical.
They took the poetry out of the dictionary.
Yeah, it was like removing the poetry, and it's no longer a belletristic document. It's now kind of a technical linguistic document. And I think Gove would have said, yes, that's exactly what I want to do. Unfortunately, a lot of the public reception or the critical response from people who were really literary critics, they reacted, of course, as most people would, to change, which is they didn't like it. Today, I think this is unremarkable. I think it's not a controversy anymore. Nobody complains.
You don't read the dictionary for the poetry now. You want those immediate answers.
And it's become like the regular standard for how pretty much all dictionaries work.
Absolutely. And I think the word is dictionary-ese. He created a kind of meta language that weirdly has aged beautifully. And what I mean by that is that language of the 1961 edition, those are still the definitions we use at the National Spelling Bee, because the official word list of the National Spelling Bee is that particular edition. And you might think that 60 plus years later that the definitions would be too old to be still accurate. But in fact, the occasional technical modification aside, those definitions sound like a dictionary. They sound authoritative and they work just fine. He created, I don't think this was his intention, but one of the results is he created kind of a meta language, which is not unlike what happened with the King James Bible. That form of poetry of prayers that is in wedding vows and the funeral rites and things like that, that was already archaic language when the King James Bible was written. They deliberately made it sound like your daddy's or your granddaddy's language because that sounds more authoritative. That's sort of what Dictionary Ease has done. It's created a meta language, a special kind of language that of or relating to, that kind of formulation, which, by the way, that only exists because of grammatical accuracy, right? We're trying to make sure that this word can fit in a sentence as an adjective or an adverb. Yes, Dictionary Ease was sort of our own Frankenstein monster, and it's had its own life. And you're right, all dictionaries sound like this today. And I think it's because people recognized, oh, right, it's a kind of easy way to be accurate.
It allows it more accessibility just in general, because the initial definition that you read of inflation is pretty, but it's also sort of repetitive and recursive in a way that could be misconstrued or misunderstood. And having it truncated and just really clear allows everyone reading the dictionary to kind of come to the same conclusion about what the word actually means.
And it has to work all by itself. You shouldn't have to go to another entry to understand this one. It should stand on its own. And again, that philosophical divide between the phenomenon that a word is labeling and the equivalent of the word itself.
It does make those critics sound like gatekeepers.
I know. I'm a little mad that Gove took all the proper nouns out of the dictionary, though, because those would have been real handy in Scrabble.
And Scrabble, of course, you can't play proper nouns.
Merriam-Webster, the official dictionary of Scrabble.
Yeah,
Scrabble
that's true.
Dictionary is a Merriam-Webster dictionary.
Absolutely.
Peter Sokolowski from NEPM and Jazz a la Mode.
Jazz at 8.
And from our dictionary in Springfield, right in our backyard, where Dictionary Ease was created here in Springfield. Thanks for being our interim word nerd and joining us again.
Thank you.
Kibilio Community and Farm in Leyden and Susu Community and Farm in Vermont are both centering BIPOC experience and ancestral agriculture, and they're teaming up to produce a sound bath this weekend focused on the works of Audre Lorde.
We'll hear about that with Kibilio's David Ragland and Susu's Amber Arnorld next. You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM.
Welcome back to the Fabulous 413. The Kibilio Community and Farm is rooted in Black and queer land sovereignty. It's an intergenerational, intentional community dedicated to embodied healing and reparative, ecological, and reproductive justice. They in this BIPOC community invite you to be a part of their journey of healing and healthy living so that we all may cooperatively work towards educating for Indigenous land justice and ecological balance. For more than 4 years now, they have been creating an intergenerational Black, queer, and ancestor-centered cooperative community focused on decolonizing the populace and on the areas of struggle in which their various members engage. They envision a community of long-term residents and seasonal stewards living in ways that achieve ecological balance in spaces that support embodied healing and refuge to stem the tide of increasing political, ecological, and racial harm. This month, they'll be teaming up with Susu Community Farm in Vermont, who have a parallel mission for their organization, for an event centering Audre Lorde, and with us to talk about that, possibly their upcoming Octavia Butler event as well, and more, are David Ragland of the Kibilio Community and Farm and Amber Arnorld of Susu Community Farm. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Oh, it's our pleasure. I want to talk to you both, and we'll start with you, David, about just how this farm and community came to be here. Like, how did you find your land? How did you find like-minded folks to join with in a pursuit of agriculture and equity?
Sure. It's like the intersection of social justice activism and seeing how a lot of the demands of movements really connect to providing for people's basic needs. And that was part of the conversation that I learned from folks like Leah Penniman, who's doing Soul Fire Farm. And in 2019, I was a part of a interfaith, multi-religious community that during COVID was shut. And many of the Black and BIPOC residents were going to be without housing. And some friends and I had organized around the Poor People's Campaign in Franklin County. And I've been organizing around reparations with the Fellowship of Reconciliation as well. And I think the stars came together with need and a collective vision that many of us have been fostering at that time around the places where our movements intersect, and they're often at land. Just the realization that many people have come to, the importance of connecting to nature for healing and even connection with other people. A number of us were able to get support locally, but also from around the country for a vision for this beautiful land. One of our collective members said, "Hey, have you seen this farm, this piece of land?" And we came out to this farm near Greenfield, and through prayer and lots of organizing, we were able to bring a vision to fruition.
Amber, does that story mimic what happened with you and Susu Community Farm?
Susu started right before the pandemic, but how we started was really around wanting to increase access to nourishing food and connection to land and reclamation of our cultural and lineage practices as Black people. And so we initially started as a farm to challenge the commodification of food and of housing and things like these, to really show that these are all birthrights and there's not something that we should have to work or labor for. And so initially when we started Susu, we had a CSA program that grew to about 60 members. We were offering free food for people of color in our community. And then once we purchased our farm, we were able to grow many varieties of Afro-Indigenous crops and then offer a lot of healing retreats and space for people to really reconnect with the wisdom of their bodies, with the land, and reclaim many of the ancestral practices that we have been disconnected from intentionally through systems of oppression.
Actually, that's a great point to move on from. Both of your farms have retreats often throughout the year. Like Kibilio just finished Black into the Land, and Susu, your retreats are all full, but like you just completed a hands-on immersion one, and you have one coming up called Black August Healing Waters Immersion that you just can't get into, but we'll mention anyway. Like, how important are those sorts of workshops for people in the community of color, especially, to get out on your land and really see what you do and get their bodies involved in the work that each of your farms is pursuing?
I believe that it's so deeply important. And I feel like one of the things that we see often in the healing retreat spaces that we offer is that people are coming from all over the country, and many people for the first time are starting to see that something else is possible, something that they didn't even imagine could be possible in their lives and how they feel in their bodies and how they're able to cultivate and experience a sense of belonging and community. And I feel like the retreats that both of our farms are offering are really a reclamation of the sacred practice of radical imagination. And imagination is what systems of oppression try to steal from us, so that because if we can't imagine a future beyond our current circumstances, we aren't going to be able to create it. And so for people to be on land and to be connected with each other and to have space that is separate from the objectification of our bodies and of spaces that treat us as disposable is so deeply important and has profound reverberations into our communities and then into the communities that the people who come to our retreats are then able to build in the worlds that they're going into.
I would agree with that. One of the main reasons that many of the people coalesced around Kibilio was just the need to move out of extractive capitalism. When we first talked about Kibilio with many people, they couldn't imagine it. They couldn't see their world outside of, but they wanted to, but they didn't know how it could happen. And so to a large extent, I would suggest our projects are visionary, uh, or at least like they are helping people see what's possible in the same way people who came before us, like Fanny Hamer, and even in the tradition of maroonage, or those African and indigenous individuals who would often escape oppressive conditions and live together in rural farm communities, or and sustaining from the land, but also if we can see that we can have a different relationship with land, looking at ourselves as connected stewards and related to the land. Humans, we don't come from any other place but this planet. So I think part of it is seeing ourselves as not people to extract from the land, but people who can learn how to live, and even be healed, from, in very simple ways, from the stressfulness of living in a city, or the stressfulness of living in areas that are polluted. Just at a basic level, the people who come to Kibilio experience that, and we have groups that also come every year for educational convenings to learn, and our places often serve as convening places that feel good and welcoming, for communities of color similar to ours that don't have access to this land. You know, many people want to welcome BIPOC folks into their spaces, but there's also an important need for places that are cultivated by Black, brown, and indigenous folk, for Black and brown and indigenous folk, that also welcome other folks to come and heal and learn about being in relationship with land in ways that are not extractive.
Yeah, I really love listening to Dave talk, and I just agree so much with everything he's sharing. And I just want to really uplift some of what he's sharing around how, especially for people of color and our relationship with being in relationship with land, seeing land as sovereign and not as a resource from to extract from, but as our actual caregiver. You know, even when we started our CSA, so much of what the education that we were doing with our community was around like, these are our intentions for growing food, but we're in relationship with the land. So that's our relationship with the land is going to determine what grows. So it's not always going to be this like big, beautiful, bountiful, all of these different variety of things. It's really based on what's happening in the ecosystem and what's available and how we're in relationship. And I think that one of the things that's really important to us when working with food is that food has traditionally been used as medicine for our communities for so long. And through the medical industrial complex and all of these different systems, so many people have been separated from how to work with food as medicine the ways that our ancestors did. Like why our ancestors nixtamalized corn or used ferments or slow cooking or all of these different things to break down anti-nutrients or to make nutrients bioavailable to our bodies. Like there is a science and an alchemy that happens in how we work with food. And so really being able to reclaim that relationship and starting to be in relationship with the changes of the climate and what that means for how we eat, starting to build relationships with climate resilient crops like callaloo or amaranth, for example. This is a plant that's really resistant to many different environments and will easily grow and doesn't need a bunch of extra supplementing or support. And so how can we actually be in relationship with wild foods, foods that are going to grow naturally, with plants that we consider invasive but that are actually foods? Because I think it's so important to also be working with plants that don't need lots of fertilizers when we're working with plants in their natural environment that are adapting to the ecosystem. You know, like seeds are going to grow different in the South than they're going to grow here. So even when if like friends or community share seeds with us, we plant those seeds here, they're going to be used to a certain type of climate. Then we can save those seeds over and over and help them become resistant and more aligned with the climate that we're living in here. So I think that there's all of these different ways that we as communities are in relationship with the lands that we're on, and being in relationship with the fluidity and the emergence and the change that's happening rather than trying to work against it.
We're speaking with Amber Arnorld of Susu Community Farm and David Ragland of the Kibilio Community and Farm, who are collaborating on a couple of workshops coming up centering Black women writers. It's very inspiring, which is honestly like a great way to segue into these upcoming things that you are collaborating on, the Audre Lorde sound bath on the 22nd and the Octavia Butler one on September 19th. The Octavia Butler one seems like is an easy answer on trying to connect Octavia Butler with the land. Anyone who's read Parable of the Sower kind of gets that her connection to the land that shows up in a lot of her books just in general. But talk about why having Audre Lorde and her work centered as part of this cooperative experience was important.
Yeah, I'll share, Susu is an Afro-Indigenous Black archival sanctuary. And so much of the work that we do is about being able to bring to life and live into the Black archive, and so I think in white communities, and I think this connects to what we're talking about, art, like you go to a museum and you look at art, or art is collected in places and put places. But for us, archiving is really a means of our storytelling. It's a means of our survival. It's a means of our past, present, and future. And it's something that we bring to life and get to live inside of. And Susu really centers the work of Black Womanism, which is really a commitment to the survival and the wholeness and the liberation of Black people. And it's a framework that's really rooted in collective care that recognizes that our liberation is interconnected and that we cannot be free while Black women, Black queer people, Black trans people, or any Black people remain marginalized. And so womanism is really about reclaiming the ancestral practices of protecting one another, building communities of belonging, and creating a world where Black life is valued and cared for and able to thrive. And Black women, I think one of the things that is hard for a lot of Black women when looking at how mainstream media kind of like centered the civil rights movement is that Black women were invisibilized in that in a lot of ways. And Black women have always been people who have circulated energy and protected and cared for our communities, for our children, and allowed our communities to survive, even when the world around us deemed us disposable. And so much of the work at Susu is centering Black women in our collective movements. And Black women have always been deeply connected to land. I think, if you read ever Bell Hook's essay on Home Place, where she really brings to life the power of Black women and their domestic labor, not as this suppressive system, but as a way that Black women have traditionally in bedrooms and living rooms and kitchens and makeshift shacks and little bits of land have always created spaces for Black people to experience belonging and community and safety and wholeness. And so one of the things that's really important for us is for us to bring to life in a really tangible and embodied way the wisdom that Black women that came before us have left for us. And so these silent meditation, sound bath, plant medicine journeys are a way for people to experience the wisdom of Audre Lorde, Octavia Butler, and as we continue to do more, bringing and uplifting different Black women who have historically created ways for us to see ourselves reflected in an impossible possible future. And so instead of just reading their words on a piece of paper or in a book, we're bringing their work to life in a really embodied way that people can start to feel and experience in their bodies, and then cultivate a whole different relationship with the wisdom and the traditions that they have left for us to continue building on.
That's wonderful. We've been talking with Amber Arnorld of Susu Community Farm and David Ragland of the Kibilio Community and Farm, who are collaborating on a series of sound baths and events centering women writers, especially in August. It's Audre Lorde on the 22nd, and in September, it is Octavia Butler on September 19th. Thank you both for joining me and talking about the missions for your farm. Hopefully, in the future, I will have more opportunity to talk to both of you about this, because we've just scratched the surface.
Thank you so much for your time.
I also like that we included some of the 802 in this particular episode.
I mean, they're collaborating. It counts.
They collaborate, so they meet our criteria.
Yes.
But I do love Southern Vermont in particular.
Yes. It's quite
Maybe
pretty.
someday we'll expand our horizons.
We are already doing a lot.
You're right. Four counties is plenty. On the next Fabulous 413, more theater, but this time with music.
In Williamstown, with the incredible immersion and ingenuity of the songbook with its creator, Erica Turpning-Romeo.
And the main stage production of the Berkshire Opera Festival, Lucia de Lammermoor, with founder Jonathan Loy and tenor Terrence Chinloy.
No relation. Plus, our weekly chat with Congressman Jim McGovern. If you've got a question, email us at thefab413@nepm.org.
We're going to have a lot of candidates on between now and the primary, too, so if you've got questions for the first Franklin candidates or for Seth Moulton or for Ed Markey, send them our way as well.
Because we're going to talk to all of them.
We hope. I'm Monty Belmonte.
I'm Khalil Smith. We'll talk to you tomorrow on the Fabulous 413.